They called her the Barefoot Angel of Dust Devil Gulch, a name that was half pity, half cruel joke. For Eliza Mayhew, every day was a blur of spilled whiskey, leering cowboys, and the splintered floorboards beneath her calloused feet. She dreamed of rain, of green grass, of a life where she wasn't owned by the grit under her nails. She never dreamed of a man who would walk out of the shimmering heat of the Arizona territory. A man the size of a mountain, a Chiricahua Apache warrior, who would silence a packed saloon with a promise as impossible as it was terrifying. You will wash your feet in a stream of silver. You'll give me 5 sons, and you will never work again. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how that promise was paid for in blood, dust, and bedrock courage. The heat in Dust Devil Gulch didn't just press down, it possessed. It seeped into the warped wood of the saloon and baked the very hope out of a person's soul. For Eliza Mayhew, it was just another Tuesday. Another day of fetching rye for cowhands who smelled worse than their horses, of mopping up things she'd rather not name, and of keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. Her feet, perpetually bare, were a map of her life. The soles were thick as leather, crisscrossed with the scars of shattered glass and careless spurs. Going barefoot wasn't a choice. It was a simple, brutal calculation. A pair of decent boots cost $3. Her earnings for an entire week, if the men were feeling generous, might be 2. Silas Croft, the saloon owner with a heart to match his shriveled apple face, docked her pay for every broken mug. Boots were a luxury, like a feather bed or a Sunday dress that wasn't patched in 3 different colors. At 19, Eliza looked older. The sun had etched fine lines around her pale blue eyes. But there was a stubborn set to her jaw, a resilience that angered men like Sheriff Brodie, who felt a woman's spirit ought to be pliable. Sheriff Brodie was watching her now, his chair tilted back against the far wall, a silver star pinned to a sweat-stained vest. He dispensed his own brand of justice with a lazy drawl and a heavy hand. He'd made his intentions for Eliza clear, couching his crude proposals in the language of protection. "A girl like you, all alone," he'd say, his thumb stroking the handle of his Colt. "You need a man to look out for you." She knew what he meant. It was a threat wrapped in a greasy smile. The bat-wing doors creaked open. For a moment, a figure blocked out the blinding sun, casting the saloon into shadow. Silence fell like a dropped coffin. It wasn't just the man's size, though he was immense, broader at the shoulder than any 2 men in the room. It was who he was. He was Apache. This was no reservation native, broken and drunk on government whiskey. This man was different. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt, moving with a fluid grace that was utterly at odds with his bulk. His black hair was long and unbound. His face was a mask of hard angles and weathered copper skin, dominated by dark, intelligent eyes that swept the room once, missing nothing. The piano player's fingers trailed off into a discordant clatter. Cowboys froze with glasses halfway to their lips. Even Sheriff Brodie slowly let the front legs of his chair hit the floor with a thud. The Apache's eyes found Eliza. He walked past the gawking men, his moccasins making no sound, and stopped before the bar where she stood, rag in hand. He didn't look at Silas Croft, who was fumbling for a shotgun. He looked only at her tired face, her frayed dress, and finally down at her bare, dusty feet. A strange expression crossed his features. He spoke, his voice a low baritone, clear and resonant. "They pay you to stand on broken glass?" Eliza was too stunned to answer. She just shook her head. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a single gleaming piece of silver ore, veined with pure, shining metal. It was as large as her fist. He placed it on the bar. The thud echoed in the dead quiet. "Whiskey," the Apache said, his eyes never leaving Eliza's. Silas Croft, his greed overpowering his fear, scurried forward and poured a glass with a trembling hand. The Apache didn't touch it. He held her gaze, and then he made the promise that would shatter her world. "You will come with me," he stated, not asked. "Your feet will never touch broken glass again. You will wash them in a stream of silver. You will give me 5 sons to carry my name, and you will never work another day for a man like this." The saloon erupted in a collective, incredulous gasp. It was madness. An Apache warrior buying a white woman like a horse. Sheriff Brody was on his feet, his hand hovering over his gun. "Now you listen here, Injun," he snarled. "You've had your drink. Now you get back to whatever hole you crawled out of before you get yourself filled with lead." The Apache didn't even glance at him. His focus was entirely on Eliza. "He offers you threats and a short life in the dirt," the Apache said, his voice calm and steady. "I offer you sons and a sky over your head that is your own. The choice is not his to make." He was giving her the power. In a world where she had none, this giant of a man was offering her a choice. Her mind raced. This was suicide. Leaving with an Apache was a death sentence. The town would call her a traitor. Brody would hunt them for sport. But what was her life here? A slow death. A life of servitude, ending in the grim ownership of Sheriff Brody. She looked from the Apache's steady, waiting eyes to Brody's furious, possessive glare. She looked at the gleaming silver on the bar, and then down at her own filthy, scarred feet. For the first time in years, Eliza Mayhew dared to imagine a different life. Taking a shaky breath, she dropped the wet rag onto the bar. She didn't have to say yes. She simply walked around the counter, her bare feet whispering on the floor, and stopped beside the towering Apache. She didn't look back. The sun was a merciless hammer as they left Dust Devil Gulch behind. The town watched them go with a cold, simmering silence that was more unnerving than gunfire. Eliza could feel Sheriff Brody's eyes on her back, a brand of contempt she would carry for miles. Her companion, who had given his name with a single word, Nakai, walked with a long, effortless stride. He had retrieved a powerful Appaloosa from the livery, but he didn't offer her a ride. He simply slung a heavy pack over its back and began walking east toward the jagged Dragoon Mountains. Eliza's feet, tough as they were not made for the sharp stones and scorching sand. Within the first hour, a fresh cut opened on her heel. She said nothing. She had made her choice, and this was the first payment. Nakai seemed to be a man of few words. He moved with a focused intensity, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape, reading the subtle language of bent grass and disturbed pebbles. That first night, he built a small, smokeless fire and handed her a water skin. The lukewarm water tasted better than any whiskey she had ever served. "Why?" Eliza finally asked, her voice raspy. Nakai looked at her across the flickering flames. "I had a vision," he said simply. "A woman with eyes the color of the sky after a storm, with feet that knew the hardness of the earth. The spirit said she would be the mother of a new generation for my people, a generation that could walk in 2 worlds." Eliza stared at him. Spirits. A vision. She had expected a reason rooted in gritty reality. This talk of prophecy was unsettling. "That's it?" she asked. "You saw me in a dream and decided to buy me with a piece of rock?" A faint smile touched Nakai's lips. "It was not a dream, and I did not buy you. I offered you a different path. You chose to walk it." He looked down at her feet, which she had curled beneath her skirt. "Your feet will heal, but they will not forget the ground they have walked. That is important." The next day, the real danger became clear. As they crested a low mesa, Nakai stopped abruptly. He pointed back the way they had come. Eliza squinted, seeing a plume of dust in the far distance. "3 riders," Nakai said, his voice flat. "One rides a big bay. The sheriff." A cold knot of fear tightened in Eliza's stomach. Brody. He wasn't just angry, he was insulted. His pride had been challenged. This wasn't about justice, it was about vengeance. "We walk where they cannot easily follow," Nakai said. He led them into a labyrinth of canyons, pushing the pace until Eliza's feet screamed in protest. During a brief rest, he knelt and took her foot in his hand. She flinched, unaccustomed to any touch that wasn't rough. His hands were surprisingly gentle. He cleaned the cuts and applied a dark, pungent salve. "This is Osha root," he explained. "It will stop the poison." He then wrapped her feet in soft strips of buckskin. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He looked up, his dark eyes serious. "The mother of my sons cannot be broken before she reaches her home. Your strength is now my strength. Your weakness is my weakness." In that moment, she began to see the man behind the myth. He wasn't a savage. He was a protector, a healer. On the evening of the 3rd day, they stood at the edge of a high cliff. Below them, nestled between towering rock walls, was a hidden valley. A clear river snaked through a green meadow. Small adobe homes were scattered amongst cottonwood trees. It was a secret paradise. "This is your home?" she stammered. Nakai nodded. "This is the canyon of the strong springs, the home of my people, the Chiricahua who never surrendered." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Welcome to your new life, Eliza Mayhew. Here, the ground is soft, and the water runs with silver." She had left a life of squalor for a promise of sons and riches. But as she stood on the precipice of this new world, she realized Nakai hadn't just brought her to a place. He had brought her to a destiny guarded by a vengeful sheriff and the secrets of a people fighting for their very survival. The real journey had only just begun. Entering the canyon of the strong springs was like stepping into another world. But any sense of peace was shattered by the stairs. As they walked into the settlement, people emerged from their homes, their faces masks of suspicion and outright hostility. They looked at her, the white woman, as an omen, a contamination. An older woman, her face a web of wrinkles, emerged from the largest dwelling. She stopped before Nakai, her eyes sharp as obsidian, and spoke to him in the flowing Apache language. The tension between them was a crackle in the air. Finally, she gave Eliza a long, dismissive look and strode back into her home. "That is my aunt, Taza," Nakai said, his voice low. "She is the clan elder. She does not approve of my vision. She thinks a white woman will bring the U.S. Army down upon us." The fear was valid. This hidden sanctuary survived only because it was a secret. Eliza's presence was a lit fuse. The days that followed were a trial by fire. Life here was not idle. "You will never work again" had not meant a life of leisure. It meant she would never again work for another's profit. The women taught her, their instruction often grudging, how to grind corn, tan hides, and weave baskets. Her hands, already calloused, became tougher, but these were the calluses of creation, not servitude. Every mistake was met with disapproving glances from Taza, who seemed to be always watching. Nakai was her only ally. He was patient, spending the evenings teaching her his language, telling her stories of his ancestors. Their relationship was one of quiet companionship. The promise of 5 sons hung between them, an unspoken future. He was waiting, she realized, for her to truly choose this life as a home. One afternoon, a young boy fell while climbing rocks, his leg broken, the bone sticking out at a horrifying angle. The medicine man's chants did nothing. A fever set in. Eliza, remembering a doctor from her past, knew what had to be done. Ignoring Taza's venomous glare, she went to work. She washed the wound with boiled water. She sterilized it with a bit of the corn liquor the tribe made. She packed it with the osha root Nakai had used on her feet and bound it tightly with clean cloth. For 3 days, she sat with the boy. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. He would live. The boy's mother wept and embraced her. It was the first gesture of genuine acceptance. A few others nodded at her with newfound respect. Even Taza's glare seemed to have lost some of its fire. Eliza had started to build a bridge. A week later, Nakai took her behind a waterfall into a dark cave. The walls glittered in his torchlight. Veins of raw, pure silver ran through the rock like frozen lightning. "You will wash your feet in a stream of silver," Nakai said softly. He gestured to a small pool, its bottom lined with silver-laced stones. This was the treasure. Not a promise of wealth, but the source of the community's independence. He was sharing its secret with her. It was a gesture of ultimate trust. As she looked from the glittering walls to Nakai's earnest face, she felt a profound shift. This man, his people, this hidden canyon, it was becoming her home. She reached out and took his hand. "Nakai," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I am home." His hand tightened on hers, and in the silver-lit darkness, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a kiss of quiet confirmation, a promise sealed. But outside the canyon, a bitter sheriff had not forgotten his humiliation. He was no longer just hunting a woman, he was hunting a fortune. The seasons turned. Eliza's life settled into a new rhythm. Her relationship with Nakai blossomed, built on deeds, not words. The Barefoot Waitress was a ghost. In her place was a woman who belonged. Then the first part of the prophecy came true. Eliza was with child. The news was met with joy and apprehension. For Nakai, it was the fulfillment of his vision. For Eliza, it was an act of supreme hope. Taza, the clan elder, remained watchful, as if waiting for this fragile happiness to shatter. In the heart of a warm summer, their son was born. He had Nakai's dark hair and, to Eliza's endless wonder, her own sky-blue eyes. They named him Chochok, Spirit Warrior. Holding her son, Eliza felt a love so fierce it stole her breath. This was the meaning of the promise. But a shadow was creeping back toward their paradise. Miles away, Sheriff Brody was nursing a cold rage. His obsession had curdled into a lust for the silver he was now convinced existed. He had lost their trail, but he hadn't given up. He offered a substantial reward to any tracker who could find a hidden band of Chiricahua. The whisper on the wind came from a man named Jedediah Kane, a former army scout with a heart as barren as the landscape. For a share of the spoils, he agreed to lead Brody. But Brody knew attacking an Apache stronghold was suicide for a small posse. He needed an army. He traveled to Fort Bowie and spoke to its commander, Captain Wallace. Brody spun a tale of a renegade war chief who had kidnapped a white woman and was using a hidden silver mine to fund raids. The kidnapping provided the perfect justification. Wallace, eager for a promotion, agreed to provide a detachment of 20 cavalrymen. They would be rescuers, not invaders. Back in the canyon, an unease began to stir. Scouts reported more cavalry patrols, moving in strangely purposeful patterns. Nakai grew quiet. He doubled the watch and began organizing the warriors. "The wind whispers of trouble," he told Eliza one evening. "The soldiers are angry hornets. Brody is a man with a hole in his spirit, and he thinks he can fill it with silver and revenge." The idyllic peace was over. The harsh reality of the world was coming for them. Eliza looked at her sleeping son. She thought of the promise Nakai had made in that dusty saloon. She finally understood. The promise wasn't just about bearing children. It was about fighting for them. The approaching storm would not find a barefoot waitress cowering in fear. It would find a woman forged in the fires of the canyon, with a spirit as hard as the mountains that surrounded her. The attack came at dawn, with the sudden, terrifying crack of a dozen rifles echoing off the canyon walls. Bullets ripped through the homes. A woman fetching water screamed and fell. Chaos erupted. Eliza grabbed her son, Chochok, and scrambled to the back of their home. Nakai was already gone, a shadow melting into the pre-dawn with his rifle. The tribe's warriors, outnumbered and outgunned, moved with disciplined urgency to their defensive positions. From a slit in the wall, Eliza saw them. Blue-coated cavalrymen advancing in a skirmish line, and leading them, standing beside a smug-looking Captain Wallace, was Sheriff Brodie. He was pointing, directing their fire, his face alight with triumphant malice. The Apache warriors responded with deadly accuracy. Arrows whistled from unseen positions, finding their marks, but the soldiers had a Gatling gun, and its devastating fire was pinning the warriors down. Taza, the old clan elder, was a whirlwind of motion, her disapproval burned away by the immediate danger. She directed the women and children to the safest place, the silver mine behind the waterfall. "Go," she commanded Eliza. "Take the child." But Eliza hesitated. She saw Nakai, a powerful figure firing from behind a rock outcropping, drawing the soldiers' attention. The thought of cowering in a cave while he fought and died was unbearable. "Nalin, take Chochok," Eliza said, handing her bundled son to her friend. "Keep him safe." Eliza didn't have a gun, but her mind, sharpened by survival, was a weapon. She knew the soldiers were arrogant. They wouldn't be expecting ingenuity. She scrambled to the food stores and filled several large baskets with dried chili peppers. She grabbed clay pots filled with pitch. Creeping to a ledge overlooking the soldiers' position, she built a small fire. She heated the pitch until it bubbled, then set the baskets of chilies ablaze. The smoke that billowed out was thick, acrid, and eye-wateringly potent. Waiting for the wind to shift, she shoved the smoking baskets over the edge. The effect was devastating. The choking smoke enveloped the skirmish line. Soldiers began to cough, their eyes streaming, their disciplined line breaking as they staggered back, blinded. The relentless fire from the Gatling guns sputtered and stopped. In that moment of confusion, Nakai roared a war cry. The Apache warriors surged forward in a swift, coordinated strike, overwhelming the disoriented soldiers. Eliza had turned the tide. Then she saw it. A small group of soldiers, led by the tracker Kane, had broken off. They were heading for the waterfall. They were going for the women and children. Fear, sharper than any she had ever known, pierced through her. Chochok was there. She grabbed the heaviest pot of bubbling pitch and ran. She was faster than the soldiers, her body hardened by endless labor. She reached the pool at the base of the waterfall, just as Kane and 3 soldiers emerged from the trees. "Well, look what we have here," Kane sneered, raising his rifle. "The chief's white." With a scream of pure, primal fury, Eliza swung the heavy pot. It arced through the air and shattered against Kane's chest. He shrieked in agony as the burning tar seared through his shirt and flesh. The soldiers, shocked, faltered for a heartbeat. That heartbeat was all Taza needed. The old woman emerged from behind the waterfall, Nakai's heavy war club in her hands. She brought it down on the head of the nearest man before the others could react. The surviving soldiers lost their nerve and fled. Eliza stood panting, the empty pot handle still clutched in her hand. Taza came to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. The old woman's eyes were no longer filled with suspicion, but with a fierce, unwavering respect. "You have the heart of a Chiricahua warrior, daughter," Taza said. But their sanctuary was forever broken, and the price of the promise was still being paid. The Apache counterattack was savage, but the Gatling gun forced a grim stalemate. As the sun beat down, Nakai found Eliza by the waterfall cave. "My warrior woman," he whispered, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Their reunion was shattered by a cry from the cave. Taza's young grandson had been hit by a stray bullet. Eliza, remembering the words of a frontier doctor, knew the bullet had to come out. "I need a knife, fire, and whiskey," she declared. In the flickering firelight, surrounded by the sounds of war, she performed a nightmarish surgery, cutting the lead from the boy's flesh. As dusk fell, a scout returned. The soldiers were fortifying the canyon mouth. The Gatling gun now aimed directly at the waterfall. They were trapped. "We must use the spirit path," Taza urged, speaking of a legendary near-vertical climb up the cliff face. It was their only hope. Just then, the Gatling gun opened fire, chewing at the rock above them. They couldn't climb under fire. Nakai's face hardened. "I will take 10 warriors and attack their camp," he told Eliza, his voice gentle but absolute. "It will draw their fire. You must lead the others up the path." "No," she pleaded. "It's a suicide mission." "There is no other way," he said, kissing her one last desperate time. "Get our son to safety. Live. Tell him who his father was." He glanced at their sleeping son. "5 sons," he murmured with a sad smile. The spirits were feeling optimistic. Before she could protest, he was gone. As war cries erupted from the far end of the canyon, Eliza knew Nakai's diversion had begun. With Chochok strapped to her back, she joined the silent, terrified exodus up the spirit path. The climb was a nightmare of wind and darkness. Every gunshot from below was a fresh wound in her soul. They reached the top at dawn, a battered handful of survivors. The canyon below was silent. In the growing light, they saw Sheriff Brody swaggering through their ruined homes. There was no sign of Nakai. He was gone. Grief was a fire in Eliza's veins, but it burned away her fear. She handed her son to her friend, Naylan, and walked down a clear trail into the open. Brody and Captain Wallace rode to meet her, their faces triumphant. "Came to rescue you, Lizzie," Brody sneered. "The silver," Eliza said, her voice a dead monotone. "It's in a hidden chamber in the mine. Only Nakai knew how to open it." The lie, laced with a genuine sob on his name, was perfect. Greed glittering in his eyes, Brody dragged her towards the waterfall cave alone. She led him deep into the silver mine's darkness. "The secret is a loose stone at the base of the wall," she whispered. As Brody bent down, his back to her, she grabbed a heavy, sharp rock. With a scream of rage and loss, she brought it down on his head, and again, and again. She walked out into the sunlight, covered in his blood. "A warrior was hiding," she gasped to the soldiers. "He killed the sheriff and escaped through a back tunnel." Eager to leave the cursed canyon, they believed her. The survivors, led by Taza and the woman they now revered, did not return to their haunted home. They traveled to a new, secret valley and began again. Eliza never remarried, raising Chochok with stories of his heroic father. The promise of 5 sons was never fulfilled, but in the children of the survivors, a new generation was born. The Barefoot Waitress was gone, replaced by the white mother of the Chiricahua. A leader, a healer, and a legend forged in the fire of a promise paid for in blood. If this story of unlikely love, brutal survival, and unbreakable will moved you, hit that like button. Share this piece of history with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe for more tales from the dusty, dangerous, and dramatic American West. Thank you for watching.